Going live.
Hi, sorry, just waiting just a second for people to get into the meeting. Thank you so much for joining us today for another wonderful Earth Day every day. My name is Vanessa. I'm with the Dallas Public Library, and we host a series with the Department of Environmental Equality and Sustainability. Just a few housekeeping things for today. You will be muted and your video will be turned off during the presentation. However, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, or if you have any comments, again, put those in the chat, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Judy to tell a little bit more about what her department does and to introduce our speaker for today.
Hello, yes, my name is Judy Schmidt, and I'm with the City of Dallas in the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. And what we do in our department is we focus on a number of topics, everything from A to Z, really: air quality, energy, green living, urban agriculture, but also water conservation, stormwater compliance, and a number of other programs and projects, as well as the Comprehensive Environmental Climate Management Plan, which is the first of its kind for the City of Dallas. And we're in the second year of working on that in the implementation phase. But I wanted to take a minute before I introduce our wonderful speaker to just mention that this is Native Plant Week. And recently, I was able to, with the team, the outreach team in OEQS, to be able to be at the Discovery Garden and at Fair Park during the fair. And it was just so inspiring to me and amazing to see all the wonderful native plants. And I think John's going to be talking about some of them today, and just that symbiotic relationship between insects and plants. But there's just beautiful inland sea oats. There are just kind of waves of them out there right now. And the beautyberry is just luscious. The berries, the beautiful purple, vivid purple berries. And the Turk's cap is still so beautiful. And so many things out there are just thriving and just astonishing. And I mention that because native plants that are adapted to the area, either they were here long before we came, or we're putting them back in to place, they take less water. And that's so important for us to nurture and take care of our natural resources, especially, water. Here in Dallas, the fourth largest metropolitan area in the nation. And you probably see license plates every day from different states. We are going to need a lot of natural resources such as water. So every drop we can save, whether it's installing native plants into our gardens or even around our businesses, is very critical. And that brings me to something else I want to mention. I want to invite everyone, and I'll put it in the chat, to the 27th annual Waterwise Landscape Tour that we're having this weekend. It's going to be a virtual program. We have some wonderful speakers, and they're going to be teaching about really how to have all kinds of drought tolerant and drought resistant plants and elements in your home environment. And then also we'll have a speaker on irrigation tips. And I think we all need winter irrigation tips after what happened in February. So I hope you can join us. It's free. It's we're going to be here on the Zoom link with the Dallas Library for this. And we're just really thrilled about it. So I'll put that in the chat. But with that, I am going to take just another minute and introduce our marvelous speaker. And let me exit full screen, and here we go. So John Watts he's the entomologist at the Texas Discovery Gardens, which is a fabulous year-round operated facility here in Dallas. It's open year-round, and so we invite you to come and enjoy all of it. He is going to be talking about, as I say, that heady and compelling relationship between plants and insects today. He's passionate about his topic, the science that he operates within every day, the insects. Hopefully he'll begin by telling you something about the monarchs he's tagged as a kind of a continuation from his program from last week. And he just loves the diversity and the biodiversity of this planet. and wants us all to know about it and learn about it and care about it. And with that, I am going to hand it over to John Watts. Welcome.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and share my screen here and get going on this. Okay, yeah, well, let me first do the monarch thing since you wanted me to bring that up.
Yes, please.
The second wave came through with that front just like I expected it to. And in fact, it was a larger number, and I was able to yesterday tag 65 monarchs, and the day before that, another 65. I tagged 290 butterflies this year. Hopefully some of them will end up there in Mexico, and someone will find them down there and let us know in February how the population is doing down there. I don't think there's going to be any more. This little weak front that came through last night, they decided to take those northern winds to help them travel on down to Mexico. So you may or may not see any more around this area before they end up in Mexico.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that update.
You're welcome.
Fabulous. Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get going here. Insects and plants have been around for an extremely long time. They've co-evolved together from the very beginning. In fact, flowers were specifically evolved by plants to use the animals that visit them to help them reproduce better, because pollination, of course, is how plants reproduce. Without that, there are no seeds. No seeds, no next generation. The shape and color and smell of flowers, we call this the gestalts, and these can give clues to what animals might pollinate the flowers. For instance, any flower that's tubular or zygomorphic, as we call that, are usually associated with those insects or even hummingbirds that have long mouth parts. Blue flowers are specifically more attractive to bees and other insects, and that's because bees see a lot in the blue and ultraviolet range. But the very first pollinators were probably beetles, because flowers have been around since the Jurassic, basically the beginning of the age of reptiles, and long before there were any bees and butterflies. But there were beetles already. They were one of the first groups of insects to come in existence, and were already diversifying quite quickly. And those flowers that are pollinated by beetles, they tend to have tough, leathery petals and sepals and produce copious amounts of pollen, which is very sticky, and very little nectar. They also tend to have strong sort of pungent odors to them. They're usually in colors of white, cream, or yellow, and the sticky grains very easily stick to the body of the insect. And some examples of beetles that go to flowers that you're likely to see include the soldier beetles. These you usually find in the spring or early summer. They feed, of course, on the pollen and nectar in the flowers, whereas the larvae of these beetles are soil-inhabiting predators. They also exhibit a combination of black with orange, red, or yellow in coloration. And this is an example of what we call aposematism, or warning coloration. These particular types of beetles produce poison compounds in their hemolymph, their blood. And so it makes them toxic to predators. And so they advertise that with the bright colors. Tumbling flower beetles are one of my favorite little beetles, because when you catch them in the flowers, they basically bounce around in your hand. They tumble around, which is where they get the name tumbling flower beetles. They're kind of a top shape, they're pointed at one end and then more rounded at the front end. The larvae of these are also predatory, and they live in the soil. But the adults are found quite commonly on flowers. Jewel beetles. The genus most likely you're going to see here would be in the genus Acmeodera, and they're tend to be kind of small beetles. As you can see, a lot of them are brightly colored in yellow and black, so that they basically mimic bees and wasps. Being a beetle, beetles can't sting, and so if you look like something that can sting, most things aren't going to want to bother you for fear that you could sting. As you can see, the one in the bottom center is covered in pollen. Blister beetles. I'm sure you've seen some, especially like the one on the far left that's all black. These guys get their name because their hemolymph, their blood, has caustic compounds in them that can cause blistering on human skin. The adults, of course, love pollen, and the larvae are parasitic on burrowing insects, and some of them actually parasitize the eggs of grasshoppers. Even the scarab beetles, some of them can be found on flowers. It's a particular family of beetles that not all of them feed on dung, but most of them do feed on organic decomposing plant material, which dung, of course, is in most herbivores. But a lot of them also will be found in rotting wood and decaying plant materials, such as the thatch that occurs in your grass. The adults, although predominantly feed on fruit and sap, there are many species that will also be found on flowers. And a lot of those that feed on flowers also mimic bees and wasps to some extent, like the ones on the left and center of the photographs here. Longhorn beetles. You can see where they get that name. They have very long antennae. And so that's where the longhorn name comes from. Most of the beetles in this subfamily are particularly shaped, elongated, and what we have is a trapezoidal pronotum. That means it's shaped kind of like that. The adults are quite common on flowers, especially in late spring and early summer, where they assist in pollination. And they do tend to prefer plants in the umbel family, as you can see here, or that's plants in the carrot family. Many of them, of course, because they are on flowers, again, will be mimics of bees and wasps. It's a very common phenomenon for things to mimic bees and wasps. Even flies. And believe it or not, the vast majority of flies are actually pollinators. Most of them prefer to go to flowers that are either white, yellowish, or greenish. And they, especially composites and umbels in particular, are some of their favorite flowers. Soldier flies are one of these groups, and they have wings that rest and folded scissor-like over the abdomen when they're on the flowers or vegetation, as you can see in the center and right photograph here. The antenna are long with a terminal segment that, when it's bent, it gives it a flagged appearance. Adults are quite common on flowers. All flies are liquid feeders. They can't eat anything solid, so some of them have to either sponge up the food with their like a housefly's mouth parts. Many of them will also throw up on it in order to digest it a little more. But the flower feeders don't need to do that since they're going after the nectar. Bee flies. The bombyliids are wonderful pollinators of flowers, and they're quite hairy looking compared to other flies, and even more bee-like than some of the other flies because of the hairy aspect of them. They're parasitoids on soil-inhabiting beetles and Hymenoptera. Hymenoptera are bees, wasps, and ants. So anything that burrows into the soil to put their nest when it belongs to a wasp or a bee, that's one of their potential hosts. And as you can see, they're quite fuzzy or hairy, and many of them have a very long proboscis for sticking into flowers. It's not used to jab people. Hoverflies, also called syrphid flies. They're good bee and wasp mimics. As you can see, the one on the left looks just like a bald-faced hornet, and the one on the right, a honeybee. Yes, a honeybee. The larvae of most species are predatory on aphids, and therefore helpful in your garden to get rid of those garden pests. And others are scavengers in the larval form. Thick-headed flies, also pollinators as adults, but the larvae are endoparasites of wasps, bees, ants, crickets, and cockroaches. And if you look at the one on the left, the end of the abdomen is got special structures that act like a can opener. They use that to rip open the abdomen of the host to lay their egg into it. And these particular ones on the pictures here, you'll oftentimes will find them, if they're not on flowers, up next to a paper wasp nest, the ones that hang in the eaves of your house, where they mimic the actual wasp that they're parasitizing. The wasps mistake them for the individuals in their colony, And when the wasps aren't looking, they'll run in there real quickly and then lay their eggs inside the nest of the wasp. Tachinid flies, also called parasitoid flies. Let me explain what the word parasitoid means. You have predators, you've got parasites, and you have parasitoids. Predators eat more than one entire organism. Parasites feed on an organism but don't kill it, whereas parasitoids kill what they feed on, and it's usually one individual. But because they are smaller than the individual they eat, they're not really a predator. They're kind of between the two. So that's where the word parasitoid comes from. And this particular family of flies are extremely important for controlling insect populations of many types. And many of them are large and bristly and bee-like or wasp-like in appearance. For example, the one in the upper left, that particular one that has the orange abdomen and the black wings, that one parasitizes stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs, of which the squash bug is a common one on people who grow squashes and pumpkins. So this one is a good guy. They're all good guys, basically. Relatives of butterflies, the moths, they are, of course, pollinators as well. Since they're related to butterflies, most species do indeed visit flowers for their food. Since the majority of moths are nocturnal, the flowers that they go to tend to be white, and they open at night and have very strong sweet smells. Think of nicotiana or honeysuckle, or even angel's trumpets. Those are all moth-pollinated flowers. And probably the most bizarre of the moths that pollinate flowers are yucca moths. These are very small, primitive moths that are unique in that they deliberately collect the pollen from the flower, and then they put it onto the female portion of the flower to pollinate it. And then they will lay their eggs in that particular flower that they've pollinated, and the caterpillar lives inside the seed pod, eating most of the seeds that are in there. There's usually enough left over that the plant is able to reproduce. But without the yucca moths, yucca flowers cannot be pollinated. And it's the same way with the moth. Without the yucca, the moth can't reproduce. These two are so co-evolved that one cannot exist without the other anymore. Fairy moths, very dainty little moths. They're small day-flying moths with exceptionally long antennae. And the metallic colors of purple and green and blue on the wings is quite attractive to them. You will often find these in the springtime on flowers, whereas the caterpillars themselves we'll find in the leaf litter where they eat the decaying leaves. If anyone has grown tomato plants, you've gotten tomato hornworms. This is, of course, is a pest to those of us who like tomatoes. But they have to turn into something, and they turn into a moth, a sphingid moth, a hawk moth, which when they're flying at dusk or around flowers are often mistaken for hummingbirds. The adults are very commonly found visiting tubular flowers such as 4 o'clocks and datura at dusk time. Another common sphinx moth in this area is the snowberry clearwing. This is a day-flying sphinx moth that mimics bumblebees. And indeed, it looks very much like one, but of course it's hovering when it's at the flowers. And if you look at it, of course, it has a proboscis. Of course, it can't sting being it's a moth. The caterpillars feed on snowberry and honeysuckle. Another day-flying sphinx moth called the Nessus breeds on Virginia creeper and grape, and loosely resembles a bee, and like the other ones, they go to tubular flowers, like phlox and lantana. Flower moths. These are closely related to the dreaded corn earworm, the worm that you get in your ears of corn. They are called flower moths because that is where they spend most of their time, is resting inside the flowers of their host plant. The genus is Shinia. The adults look just like the petals or the flowers themselves that they're hiding in. And they will lay their eggs in the developing seed head of the flower, and what the caterpillar eats the developing seeds. Forester moths, very boldly patterned day-flying moths, found mostly in the spring and early summer, visiting small white flowering shrubs and trees. They can be oftentimes mistaken for butterflies because of how vivid the colors are. But as you can see, they don't have the antenna that you would expect a butterfly to have. Plus, the way they are holding their wings when they rest is definitely a characteristic of moths. Speaking of butterflies, there are particular gestalts to their flowers. Since they are diurnal creatures, they have exceptionally good color vision, and they prefer shades of lavender, pink, yellow, orange, and white for their flowers, and their flowers tend to be tubular in shape. And there are actually 5 families of butterflies in our area, especially if you lump the brushfoots as one group. And each group is quite distinctive. For instance, the swallowtails, which are the most ancient of the butterflies, have been around since at least the age of dinosaurs. And they're a very large species with a fluttering habit when they're feeding on flowers. In fact, they're the only butterflies when they're on the flowers keep the wings moving. The caterpillars are distinctive. If you've ever grown parsley or dill or pipevine, you get swallowtail caterpillars all the time on there. Well, let me go back to that one more time. The lantana on the left there with that giant swallowtails on, the reason I wanted to come back to this is I wanted to explain something about why they have 2 different colors of blooms. When you do grow lantana with the yellow in the center and then the outer petals, either flowers are either pink or orange or red, that's on purpose for the butterflies. The flower only produces pollen and nectar when it's yellow. And then once it quits producing pollen and nectar, it changes color to either the pink, the orange, or the red, so that the butterfly won't waste their time going to the flower and not getting a reward out of it. So the plant has timed it perfectly so that the butterflies know exactly which blooms to go to. The sulfurs, whites, and orange tips, you can see where they get the name. These butterflies are fairly large, like the swallowtails, and they have these predominant colors of yellows, oranges, and whites on the wings. Like the swallowtails, they do use all 6 of their legs when walking. The reason I bring this up is because you're going to see some other families of butterflies soon that they have a little bit different way of doing that. Starting with the gossamer wing butterflies. They are small to medium size, in which the males have 6 fully functional legs, but the females only have 4 functional legs. The first pair of legs are too short to walk on, so they hold them up out of the way a little bit. The hair streaks and coppers and blues make up this group of butterflies. Many of them have tails on the hind wings and a peculiar behavioral pattern that when they're resting, they'll take the hind wings and rub them back and forth like this. And the little tails on the end will move back and forth and look like antenna. So there's a fake head on the back end of the wings. So if a predator were to attack them, they don't know which end is the front end and which end is the back end. And they usually attack the back end because of the wing moving back and forth, bringing your attention to the movement. That and the fake eye spot on the near that tail. The brushfoot butterflies get their name from the fact that the front pair of legs are extremely short, and there are little scales on the ends that give them a look of old-fashioned shaving brushes, what men used to use to put shaving cream on their face, hence the name brush-footed butterflies. All species walk on 4 legs, so they're the most advanced butterflies. And it's also the largest family of butterflies, and highly diverse in shape, size, and color. You probably recognize a number of these butterflies in these pictures. These do occur in our region here. There's one other group called skippers, and they're technically classified as butterflies, but they have characteristics that put them sort of in between butterflies and moths. They have clubbed antennae like butterflies, but they're hooked on the end, And the wings, though, are held more like those of a moth. They're either held out flat, like the ones on the right side of your screen, or the front wings are held up and the hind wings out flat, like the one in the center and the one on the far left. Wasp. Although most wasps have very few hairs on their bottom for the pollen to stick to, they usually are found on flowers where they're feeding on the nectar. And you still want to plant flowers to attract even stuff that don't necessarily pollinate them because they're important to the environment. They help prey on your pest insects. And we also don't want to have too many of our plants chewed up. And so it's good to attract even the non-pollinating things with flowers. Species of in the mint family are highly attractive to predatory wasps as well as most solitary bees. And a number of butterfly species also will visit mints to feed as well. Make sure you include flowers in your garden that have very tiny flowers to them, because there are some insects, the vast majority of insects actually, are less than 1/4 of an inch in size. So, and that's the majority of species. Chalcedoids are one of those little wasps. These are very tiny, just a couple of millimeters in size. In fact, the little fairy fly on the bottom right, that one swims in the air. The wing is so tiny that the wings are used like oars to fly in the air. Most of them are extremely specific to the host that they prey on. And many types of insects and spiders are being their host for the most part. If you look at like the third picture from the left on the top row, that wasp is laying its egg in an aphid. So it's no bigger than an aphid, and yet it can develop inside that aphid. Paper and potter wasps, you're familiar with these. These are the ones that make the paper nest in the eaves of your house. The vespids are distinct, at least shaped wasp. They have notched eyes, and their wings look pleated when they're folded over the body. The majority of them prefer caterpillars as hosts for their young. Although the adults feed on nectar and feed their larvae pre-chewed insects, they can carry a few, the potter wasps have some hairs on the abdomen and body that can actually attract pollen to them and stick to them. And they get the name potter wasp because they take mud and they form it into this beautiful little nest, as you see on the right here, with a hole in the center. And they'll stuff it with caterpillars. And then once they've laid their egg in there, they'll take another ball of mud and stick it in that hole and spread it out to make a lid that will cover it and keep it from water from getting it from the next rains. Thread-waist wasp. These get their name from the fact that they have a stalked abdomen, thread-like in that respect. They are sole inhabiting wasps. They make their nest underground individually. They do not work together like paper wasps do. And the anophelines, which is like the one on the left, they will provision their nest with moth caterpillars. And that one is paralyzed. It's not dead, it's just paralyzed. And the moth will take it down the hole and lay an egg on it. The golden digger on the right specializes on katydids to feed their young. And they usually have to provision more than one individual per nest in order to get their young through to adult stage. Prionyx is another thread-waist wasp, and they use grasshoppers to provide food for their young. The most famous cribonid wasp here is what we call a cicada killer. You may have seen them, or especially early in the summer. They're a huge wasp, a couple inches long, and you can see boldly patterned in red, black, and yellow, like the center and right photographs here. And the particular cribonids can prey on many different types depending on the species. Some of them go to wasps, some go to aphids, bees, beetles, bugs, butterflies, moths, cicadas, cockroaches, crickets. As you can see, the list is extensive, and they all specialize on one particular host. And finally, the most important pollinators are the bees. There are 6 families of bees. All of them are nectar and pollen feeders, and therefore vegan. And they're extremely important as pollinators. What separates bees from wasps is the fact that all bees have at least some of the hairs that are branching or feathery. And that's so that they can collect pollen very easily. Most female species have special pollen collecting apparatuses on their bodies, especially on the legs in many of them. With the exception of honeybees and bumblebees, all the other species are solitary. They don't make hives or nests with other individuals. The adrenids, or mining bees, get their name because they actually burrow into the ground like a mine. That's where their nests are. And there are over 1,200 species in North America in this particular genus, just this one genus of bees. And they are what we call pollen specialists. And that is the oligolectic. That's what oligolectic means. They specialize on a particular type of pollen. For example, these 2 pictures, these are both in the genus Adrena. The one on the left is Adrena helianthe, and it only goes to sunflowers. The one on the right is Adrena rudbeckii, and it only goes to black-eyed Susans. So one on the left only collects pollen from sunflowers. The one on the right only collects pollen from black-eyed Susans. That's what makes them specialists. No competition there. The halictid bees are called sweat bees because they have this habit of oftentimes landing on people's skin and licking the sweat off of you. They are small bees, and they're either metallic green, blue, or copper, or they may be black with white banded segments. But the largest family of bees in North America are the apids, the honey, bumble, and carpenter bees. There are numerous genera in our area. And the females have either one type of pollen collecting apparatus called corbiculae, and these are pollen baskets like the one in the center. If they have scopae, pollen baskets are what like honeybees have. The scopae are the brushes like one in the center here. That's the pollen brush on that one. Ooh, what happened to the pictures? Oh, there they are. Bumblebees are the largest of bees in North America and very distinctive for most people. They tend to be a shade of black and yellow, though some of them in the West have orange on the abdomen as well as black and yellow. There are 8 species you can find in Texas, but only 2 of them are commonly encountered by most people. The American bumblebee, which is the one on the upper left. The one in the center is the Great Plains bumblebee. And the one at the bottom is the Eastern bumblebee. And this the left and bottom one are the 2 that you're most likely to encounter. They can be mistaken for carpenter bees, which are also large bees found in our area. But the difference is that honeybees have fully fuzzy abdomens compared to the carpenter bees. These are carpenter bees here. They get their name because they make burrows in tree branches and trunks. And they will also nest in untreated boards. They will burrow into it. The females provision it with pollen and, of course, lay their eggs in it. They can be separated from the bumblebees because the abdomen of the females is usually bare and shiny, whereas the males are fully fuzzy. The last of them here that I'm going to talk about are the leaf-cutting bees. They're easy to identify when they've collected pollen because unlike the other 2, they don't store the pollen on their legs. They store the pollen on the underside of the abdomen. And as the common name tells you, they had this unusual habit of cutting out pieces of leaf, circular or semicircular pieces of leaf. You've probably seen this on roses and other plants in your garden. And what they do is they take those pieces of leaf and they line the inside of the burrows and the twigs that they make their nest in. And that keeps the moisture from the inside of the twig from causing the pollen to decompose inside the chambers. And so it's a unique behavior amongst bees. Well, that takes care of the slide program. I probably talked very quickly again. Let's see what we have questions right here. Do all wasps sting? Only the females, because the sting of a bee or a wasp or even an ant is actually a female egg-laying structure called an ovipositor, and it's modified. Originally, the sting was used to paralyze the prey, but it can also be used to deter potential predators. And so in the more advanced wasp and bees, it's not used for, especially in bees, it's not used for prey since they're vegetarians, but they can only, again, the females are the only ones that can sting. So big, and my dog tries to catch them. Well, good thing they don't. They get a mouthful of sting there. Is there any other questions?
So I don't.
I went through it very fast, didn't I?
No, it was great. The pictures are wonderful. So the question I had is there a way to discourage wasps from building their nest near your front door or front or back door?
If you leave the previous year's nest there, they won't make a nest.
Oh.
They never reuse the same nest. It's never the same wasp every year. It's a whole new generation. All the wasps except for the queens die at the end of the year. And the queens will hibernate usually in leaf litter or under loose bark of tree, dead logs and stuff. And they have to start a new colony every year. But if you leave the old nest in that same spot, they won't go in there for fear that there might be parasites inside the old nest.
Interesting. I'll have to try that.
Usually, though, once they get established there, they won't bother you. If you go by there every day, they get used to you. And they might look at you, but they don't come after you normally.
Good to know. Judy asked, do swallowtails have to keep their wings going for a reason when they're feeding?
They don't have to. It just happens to be part of their biology. We don't know why they do that. It seems to be a waste of energy, if you ask me. And especially since they're already big butterflies, they need a lot of energy to begin with. We don't have an explanation for that at all. I see somebody else asked, is a buckeye a brushfoot? They are indeed brush-footed butterflies. Do the tiny wasps like jasmine too? The jasmine is too big of a bloom for the tiny wasp, but I'm certain that other wasps would go to the jasmine. But more likely, jasmine is moth pollinated since it puts its odor out at nighttime.
And I put in the comments too, I know people use black soldier flies for their a compost system. So kind of like the worm composting. I know there's some people that compost with black soldier flies.
Black soldier flies, if I remember correctly, are stratiomyids. So they're soldier flies. And like them, they would go to flowers to feed on as adults. The adults themselves do look similar to a wasp in some respects. And more than likely, that's why they're black and white the way they are. They are great for composting your wet material from your cooking, the leftover bits and pieces of potato peelings and rice and stuff like that. They canids do control your squash bugs. Let them be when you see them.
So what do we need to plant to attract those?
They like composites, and they also like For instance, I'm seeing them right now on our frostweed, but they also like kidney wood. I've seen them on that. They like plants in the carrot family, so dill, parsley, fennel. Those are good for the tachinid flies.
All right, so we need to plant some parsley and dill and stuff within our squash plants then.
Indeed. Yep.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by. I'm gonna have to check it out and see if they have it online. This edible insects um, program that was mentioned. That sounds intriguing.
Yes, indeed. Let's see. Um, see if I answered all y'all's questions here.
Yeah. Did anybody else have any questions for John? I know it's an effect of my garden planning. I always suggest everyone just thinks, oh, well, I grow flowers or you grow fruits and vegetables. I'm like, no, you have to grow them all together if you would have a
Yeah,
good
and
crop.
of course, as was mentioned earlier, native plants, those are what you need to put in your yard because that's what everything here is supposed to eat. You know, all the native insects that we have in the area, that's what they've been with. They're adapted to what's already here. And you don't need the water much. You don't need the fertilize. They're reliable every year. They come back up. Many of them either from the roots or from seeds from the previous year, if they are annuals or biennials.
I have to tell a quick story here about the wasp, the wood. We call them wood bees, but I forget what they're actually
Carpenter
called.
bees.
Carpenter bees.
Yes.
So my dad made this beautiful tree, like he had to cut down a tree, so he made this beautiful stump table for my sister. It was winter, and so she moves it into her house, and then all of a sudden she has bees coming out of the stump table because he had left it untreated, just the pretty natural wood, and so all these carpenter bees came out of it because it was warm in her house. So they came out of hibernation and
Yeah, the carpenter bees, I used to call them friendly bees when I was a kid before I knew what they were because you would swing at them and they wouldn't try to sting you. They just come right back in front of you and hover in front of you, checking you out. They don't have it. Insects don't want to use their stings unless they have to. It's for protective purposes, either the young or or nest or themselves. And unless you go after them, they don't want to come after you for the most part.
I try to convince people that spiders are good things to have in your yard and garden too, but not everyone is on board with that.
Well, you got to have spiders because if there weren't any spiders, there would be so many insects they would out reproduce the world in less than a year.
Wow.
They eat so many of the things, and of course they do eat some of the things you don't want them to eat. For instance, butterflies get stuck in their webs. Nobody wants that. But butterflies themselves, each female lays a couple hundred eggs. If all those eggs survived and became butterflies, there wouldn't be too many. There'd be not enough flowers to feed those butterflies. The natural entity, the food web is complex enough so that things don't get overpopulated in one area or another.
That's a good point. Do spiders have any role in pollination at all?
No, they do not.
Okay.
They're all predatory. That being said, there are spiders that specialize on staying on flowers to catch prey, like crab spiders, for instance. Some of them can even change color. Some of the crab spiders can change from yellow to white to pink, depending on the color of flower that they're on. And they just sit there and wait for whatever comes in to visit the flower to catch to eat.
Very
Lizards
cool.
are, of course, they're beneficial to your garden, especially the native ones. And there's the anole lizards. Again, they eat whatever insects they will catch. They don't tend to try to catch things that can sting because it would sting them in their mouth, but they do eat the bugs that feed on the sap of your plants, as well as extra spiders whenever they like jumping spiders when they see them on the foliage.
I know there's some, we talked about insect pollinators today. I think there are some things like bats fruit bats, and some other things that serve as pollinators as well.
Indeed. And of course, the other major pollinator that people think about that's not an insect are hummingbirds. But if you go in the old world, you don't have hummingbirds, but there are still bird pollinated flowers in the old world. Sunbirds are one of those groups that pollinate the flowers there. And bats go for like saguaro. Without them, the saguaro wouldn't produce seed. There are even other mammals too. There's honey gliders, and there's this shrew, I think, that licks and eats flowers in Australia, if I'm not mistaken.
That's an interesting pollination method there, I guess.
And there are some flowers that, for instance, we talked about the fact that flies are predominantly pollinators, but there are certain flowers that, instead of putting out white flowers or cream color flowers, put out flowers that look like dead and smell like dead meat, carcasses. And that attracts the ones that would go to carcasses, like the green bottle flies and house flies. They trick the flies into pollinating them because the flies don't get anything out of it, because they're going there to lay eggs, and they waste their eggs on the flower. But the flower gets what they want out of it. They get pollen on the fly, and the fly goes to the next one that smells like it's a dead animal, and ends up pollinating it.
Oh, Athena has a very good question. How do you get kids to enjoy looking or watching insects versus being scared of them?
That's a very interesting question to ask. There's this phenomenon out there now called nature deprivation syndrome. And it comes from the fact that kids aren't spending any time outdoors anymore. They're spending a lot of time indoors, or they live in the middle of the city where you don't have any green space to begin with. As a result of not being exposed to these, they're getting scared of it. The only thing I can tell you is just tell kids that nature isn't out to get you. They don't care about you unless you're able to provide them with food in some way, or they to get over it. You just, I guess, need to be exposed to it. Start with having stuff, maybe pictures of insects and things, and talk about them and what they do in nature, how they're connected to the requirements that occurs in the environment. And then maybe show them some live ones in a jar or something where it can't get to them. And like I said, they don't really want to come after you. I don't really know. That's kind of out of my league there as to how to get kids to enjoy liking insects instead of being scared of them. None of my nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews are scared of bugs because they've been around me all the time, and I show them the things, and without me being scared of them, they've got no reason to be scared of them.
Yeah, I put you're talking about nature deficit disorder. I did a author lecture, and Richard Louv has a lot of really great stuff, and I would recommend checking out his books from the library. He has some good ideas for how to get kids more involved in nature.
Yeah, believe it or not, I get kids in the butterfly house who are scared of butterflies. That's just a shocker to me. I've never in my life ever seen in any literature or any movie or that butterflies were anything to be scared of, and yet some kids are scared to death of them. It's puzzling.
Yeah, I think definitely your suggestion of just getting them exposed, and there's tons of nature trails around the Dallas area. There's a Trinity Audubon Center. There's a lot of parks you can go to. So yeah, oh yes, thank you, Judy. That's a good suggestion too. The Texas Children in Nature. Yeah.
Oh yes, indeed. Yeah, I mean, go with your kids. That's one way to keep them from being scared, is to show them that you're not scared. And what if you can learn something about what it is you're around, and that you're looking at, that also decreases fear. The more you learn about something, the less you tend to be afraid of it.
Yes. I know there's kids at the library that devour the dinosaur books that tell you about the different dinosaurs. And the library has tons of insect, ID books too, like field guides and that kind of thing. So get one of those for your kids, and then put them in charge of finding the insects. And kids love discovering things.
Yeah, I know there are people that are afraid of bees. And again, that's just, I guess, from misinformation. I mean, if look at how bees are portrayed on in movies and so forth, they almost always are stinging you, and for no purpose whatsoever. You know, it's just like they come after you to sting you, and they look like they enjoy it too, from the looks they put on the faces of them in the cartoons and stuff. But you know, they're not. They don't want to waste that on you. You're not anything that they normally would worry about being an issue with their own survival. There are exceptions. Of course, some people, of course, can suffer from anaphylactic shock if they get stung, and those people become even more fearful of potential encounters with bees, and for good reason. But if they were to take the time to actually learn a little bit about that, they would learn that bees are not really going to come after them.
All right. Were there any more questions? Oh yeah, Yvonne. John covered that a little bit. I'll let him talk a little bit more about how wonderful wasps are.
Yes, of course, wasps are good. I mean, anything that goes to a flower can potentially be a pollinator. If it gets any pollen on it and it moves from flower to flower, it's going to end up pollinating flowers. But of course, wasps aren't really, for the most part, pollinators. But they're still important because they're predators of insect pests, things you don't want in your yard. I mean, you don't want a caterpillar eating your rose bushes. They will fly around and crawl around a rose bush looking for those caterpillars to feed their young. So they're what eats wasp? Goodness. What eats wasp? That's a good question. I don't know what eats wasp. Not the adults. The immature stages can be eaten by other insects, especially other wasps that might parasitize them. The adults, I don't know.
My sister's dog ate one once, and only once.
It ate a wasp?
Yes, and learned its lesson.
And it learned its lesson? Yes. I had a cat that must have come in contact with a bee or wasp early when it was a kitten, because it used to love to go outside, and all of a sudden it stopped wanting to go outside. And I think it got popped by a yellow jacket. So it became an indoor kitty. It decided it didn't want to take the chance.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's a puppy that needs some other things to play with. You need to give it some more toys.
Some moving toys.
Yeah, exactly. Moving toys.
All right. Are there any more questions before we wrap up here? So our Grow With Us on Monday is going to be about wicked plants. So all those poisonous and irritating and other kind of plants that, not all of them are terrible. I mean, some of them, like foxglove, is poisonous, but they also derive a vital heart medication from it too.
Digitoxin, yes.
Yeah, so yes. You can learn a little bit about those. And then we're gonna have a spooky Earth Day every day next week. We're talking about Dallas cemeteries, and it's interesting because cemeteries are actually a great place for native plants to survive, especially you don't like to think about abandoned cemeteries, but it kind of creates its own ecosystem there sometimes in the cemeteries.
Yeah, interesting thing about the poisons in plants. A lot of those are actually used in medicine. Many of our medicines are derived from toxic compounds in plants in many places, like aspen, for instance, which originally came from willow. It's a toxic compound to keep insects from eating the leaves of the plant. And it became, we use it to numb the nerves in teeth and so forth, or headaches. A lot of other plants are that way.
Oh yeah, black walnuts I think have a compound in them that inhibits other plants from growing near them, but it also can be used as an anti-parasitic, I think.
Yeah, creosote bush is the same way. If you ever go out into the deserts of the far southwest, you'll see creosote bushes, and you won't see anything around them because they put out compounds in their roots that kill seedlings of other plants on purpose.
So you might find out about some of those on Monday.
You never know.
Yeah. Like castor beans are one again that castor oil is a
Mhm.
good
Yep.
thing, but the plant itself is pretty pretty toxic. So
Yep.
and I'm assuming some of these insects, you mentioned some earlier that have a toxic substance. A lot of those will get it, like you said, from the plants, right? So from the
Oh,
plants
yes.
to eat.
For instance, interesting you should say that because there's a type of blister beetle found in Spain that they used to ground up the bodies and put it in a cream, and it was used as an aphrodisiac. You would rub it where you wanted the tingling aspect of the compound to occur, and that's what Spanish flies are. Is actually a beetle that was ground up in medieval times to use for that purpose.
There's a I guess there's probably the same thing as ethnobotany in the entomology world, ethnoentomology, how people and insects interact.
Yep. Yeah. Actually, I do this program every year around Valentine's Day on insect reproduction. And it's how many bizarre ways insects reproduce. And that's also where I put in the little slide on the Spanish fly because it was interesting.
Oh yeah, I like Yvonne's question. Anything to make your wrinkles go away?
Naturally. Gosh, I don't know. When you find that out, let me know as well.
I know that I know it's not insects, but I know like snail slime has been used for I think anti-wrinkles.
I think there's this one brand of wrinkle cream that has a compound that they get out of a particular type of melon, like a cantaloupe type melon. And it's just one particular cultivar that they grow in southern part of Europe that apparently helps tighten up the wrinkles and stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, the snail cream. I just don't know how I feel about the snail cream.
That means that would be a lot of snails you'd have to get the cream, I would think.
Yeah, we didn't even get into how insects are used for natural dyes, like the cochineal and.
Oh yes, that's a scale insect.
Yeah.
That is the hemolynth is purple pink, and yeah, in fact, it was used for royal colors at one time. It was extremely expensive to use. Only royalty got to use it for their robes and stuff.
All right. Well, I think that's about our time. I know I've learned a whole lot, and hopefully everyone else has learned a whole lot. So be sure to visit John at the Texas Discovery Gardens. We have a lot of programs year-round there. And right now, he did a program last week on the monarch tagging. So right now is a good time to go, and maybe not as many monarchs. You said most of them moved through already, right? But I'm sure there's still some that will come through.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll see you either Monday or next Thursday for our next Grow With Us. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Judy, do you have anything to add?
No, just thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Very informative, very informative. All kinds of new information.
I got a million of them.
I know. It's great. Bye.
You're so
everybody. Have a
welcome.
Great afternoon.
All right, you too.